everyone. Thank you. Morning. Thank you for joining, everyone. Right, welcome. This is our first webinar with Roythornes. This is covering how the BSA is reshaping contracts and professional indemnity. So to introduce myself, I'm John Pennick. I'm Financial Risk Director of Berkeley Insurance Group. So we're insurance brokers, part of Brown & Brown Group, specialists in construction industry insurances. More specifically, my expertise is in professional indemnity. So I'm going to be discussing all of the risks associated with the BSA with Darren Rolfe from Roythornes. So Darren, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning, my name is Darren Rolfe. I'm with Roythornes Solicitors. I specialise in non-contentious construction and engineering law, mostly because I used to be an engineer. And so what I do is I draft and negotiate contracts all day of all various sorts, appointments of consultants, both contracts, engineering contracts. And so my job is very much looking at the risk of the client. We act for all sorts of all sides of the industry, and seeing where that risk can be better managed.
And I think as well, it's interesting that this discussion with me from an insurance perspective and Darren from a legal perspective, those two areas go hand in hand. And I think a lot of people don't always realise that, and that there is a synergy between the two. One feeds the other and vice versa. And we'll perhaps explore that as the conversation develops. So it's quite a dense topic. For this first webinar, we're going to keep it relatively light, and some of the themes that we discuss we can expand on in future webinars. What we're going to do as well at the end is field any questions that you may have that you want to share in the chat. So we've got the chat here. If you want to add your name and your company and your question, we can answer that at the end. Or if you want to contact any of us separate to this, then that's great also. But what we're going to explore is how the Act has reshaped contracts and legal liability and risk management, but through the lens of risk, how we manage risk, how we mitigate risk. And risk means different things to me in the insurance world and to Darren in the legal world. And I wonder, Darren, if you can start, what risks have you seen associated with the BSA and how you have to think about contracts now?
Well, obviously, the biggest risk for consultants and contractors is the change in the limitation period. Going backwards from when the Act came into force, the limitation period for claims was 30 years, so that's now 27 years. But going forwards, the limitation period is now 15 years, as opposed to either 6 or maximum of 12 under Ds. And that's really changed the kind of the landscape for the people who are undertaking design, undertaking works generally, because of course that's an awfully long time in which you could be liable to some form of claim. So the biggest change there is therefore trying to reduce, manage, and make sure generally that the risks you are opening yourself up to in your contracts and your appointments is genuinely the ones that you are actually taking on, that you're able to take on, that you're able to control, and then ensuring that you can insure those risks, which of course, where the brokers come in.
Yeah, exactly. So there needs to be, what I'm picking up from what you've said there needs to be greater clarity,
yes, absolutely.
Greater understanding, and that really feeds into how we look at things from the insurance perspective, because a lot of the issues that arise from a professional indemnity point of view is where there hasn't been that clarity at the point that the contracts have been written up. There hasn't been enough clarity on where the roles lie and who's responsible. And what that's led to is, in the event of a claim, people becoming liable where they didn't realise that they were liable. And then we're in a world where people find themselves accepting risk that they didn't really understand. So from a legal perspective, I think it's clear that there needs to be a better understanding now of where that legal liability rests and how long it applies for.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, to go back slightly to what you just said, when I first started writing engineering contracts in the process industries, I was I was taught all I know by a wonderful engineer from one of the big contractors, who said to me that there are three C's in that: clarity, consistency, and certainty. And that is absolutely right. If there's no clarity of what you're doing, what you're expected to do, and equally as important, what you're not doing, then you can't possibly control or manage or insure those risks. And that is the problem that's come in with the particularly with the new duty holders roles under Part 2A of the building regs arising from the BSA, is that there is, I mean, it didn't help, obviously, that the then government decided to call the two main duty holders by the same names as under the CDM regs. So there's a distinct lack of clarity there before we start. But there is a lack of clarity to some extent. It's inevitable because new legislation, therefore you kind of have to wait till the courts get their heads around it in actual cases. But there's certainly a lack of understanding and across the industry about what these new duty holder roles mean and how they should be approached contractually, whether they should be, you know, separate appointments or separate contracts from the main appointments, main contract. There is a distinct lack of certainty about how to look after the double situation of having to carry out those roles, and yet at the same time trying not to expose yourself to things that you didn't know that you were taking on. And that,
yes, yeah, I mean that's a really important point. And from a professional indemnity point of view, knowing where you're not responsible is just as important as knowing where you are responsible. And being able to clearly document that has been a really important element of how to manage and mitigate risk. So when we think about risk and that risk as far as it manifests in the insurance world, then there's two elements to it. So there's the insurable risk and whether you've shared enough information with your insurers for them to accept the fact that you are insured for that work. So again, it still comes back to the old clarity and understanding. So there's that risk there of you not being insured because you haven't shared enough information with insurers about what you're doing. But also there is the risk management element before you even get into the realms of having to consider whether you're covered or not. It's understanding your risk, how you manage and reduce that risk. And again, that starting point is understanding what you are responsible for, what you are not, and then all of the things that extend beyond just what we're talking about here into the professional indemnity world in general. Are you competent? Are you keeping accurate records? Have you got good sight of contracts and where they apply? And I think where the contracts are being written and who they apply to, that's something that I think, as you've already alluded to, people don't yet know where those responsibilities lie. And I wonder, you know, what sort of experience have you had with your clients with that, and how have you got to a point where they're comfortable that they're legally written on the same on the best basis they can be, the contracts?
I mean, if we look specifically, because obviously we're thinking about the BSA and the biggest risk at the moment, apart from the extended limitation period, if we look at these duty holder roles for the building regs, that is a conversation. I mean, they've been in force now 18 months, and it's a conversation I still have day in, day out with consultants, contractors, and clients, whether they're developers or whatever, about what the roles are, why the roles are, what they're supposed to do, who's supposed to do what. And it comes down to in contractual terms. I mean, the biggest problem is the fact that everybody says, "Oh yeah, I know about CDM. Yeah, this isn't CDM, this building risk. Yes, principal contractor. No, they're different things."
Well, that's the really important point,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because there's that
Yeah.
confusion
Yeah,
there.
there is.
It's the
Yeah.
principal designer role in the
Yeah.
CDM and
Yeah,
for the
and yeah,
BSA.
exactly, and that is just ridiculously stupid. But the two kind of there are two levels of risk in respect of the statutory duties, and then that are then translated into the contracts and the appointments, which is not only do the people have to carry out with good engineering practice or whatever to usual levels of competence. The standard of duty care is always going to be defined as normal if you're doing in design, and that standard of duty care in itself can go from the common law reasonable skill and care to very, very high levels. But on top of that, you now also have the competencies that are required under the Act, and the interrelationship between those is quite interesting, because the Act requires that the duty holders have what I think of as SNEEP, which is skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours that the company, the individuals have to demonstrate in order to be compliant with the building regs. And the companies also have to have the organisational ability. So you've got that as this kind of silent but underlying requirement that is both a contractual risk, in that it is a term of the contract that you will do that, and it's a statutory risk, which of course breaches criminal offence.
Yes.
It is a risk to your insurance policy
Yeah.
if it's not fully understood what you're doing and how you do it, because there is that element of how you do it, not just whether or not you do it. Then.
Yes, yeah, being able to demonstrate and refer to documentation to help back that up. And
Yes.
again, that's a fundamental of how insurance claims are handled and defended. It's be able to demonstrate that you've done everything that you are reasonably required to do. And obviously, that's more of a challenge if you're not certain from the outset.
Absolutely.
And if you're entering into contracts without that clarity and certainty, then that is going to be problematic, and that problem perhaps won't manifest that quickly.
No.
And when we think about the extended liability period, then obviously that makes it even more important to get things right at this stage. And so in for the clients that you're interacting with, are you finding that that level of competency exists yet, or is that still a work in progress? Because from my point of view, it is. A lot of people, we have people that are very confident and feel that they've got a good handle on things, but others where that clarity and that certainty still isn't there.
No, I think there's an awful lot of people who are, never mind being confident about whether or not they can fulfill the roles, they don't even know they're supposed to. And that's a pretty fundamental problem. But I think that, I mean, I do a lot of training with my clients, and I'm trying to make sure that they understand what is required of them and where the risks lie, and that they then talk to their insurers to make sure that they are insured, because that's the worst case scenario. If it turns out they're not insured and something has gone wrong, you've got a 15-year limitation liability. So yeah, it is.
Well, that risk is made worse by the fact that it's associated with high-risk buildings.
Yes, that's on top of it. Yeah.
These are the type of construction projects that are going to be more likely to result in a claim. And obviously, with that degree of uncertainty that we have at the moment, and until we get to that point where there is that knowledge and understanding and enough test cases for people to understand actually that's how it works.
Yeah, exactly. That is, I mean, this is the worst period for lawyers, to be honest, because the legislation is in, we can read it, we know what we all think it means, but we don't know what it means in law until the courts have looked at it. And it's going to take however long. I mean, if I was starting, I don't do disputes, but if I was starting a case in the GCC now, I wouldn't expect to get judgment under 2 years. So we've got this long period when there's this kind of, we don't know what it means, what's going to happen, how the court's going to interpret it, and then even once we get some kind of definition, of course, there's always the rules of The courts mean that they can always distinguish between cases on facts. As I say, that uncertainty period has got a 15-year life in it, so
Yeah.
it is quite scary, to be honest. One of the things that I'm really hot on, I'm trying to reduce the risk, is actually for consultants particularly, is in the schedules of, normally in an appointment we'll have the terms and then we'll have the schedules attached that will define the services, the fees, all the rest of it. And the schedule of services, or the statement wherever it is of what services the consultant is providing, is actually, I mean, it is actually it's so critical, so fundamental to managing risk, because I mean, I remember, I've been in the legal industry more years than I'm prepared to admit to, but years and years ago, there would be standard schedules of services and you just slot them into the contract. And you kind of almost ignored the fee proposals that the parties had discussed, because that's a standard set of services. There's less of that now because the world's become a bit more sophisticated because of computer technology, frankly. But the wording of the services, if I'm acting for a developer and say I've got a structural engineer, and the structural engineer sends me a list of services that says do the structural engineering for the project, from the point of view of the developer, I'm going kind of, well, hey, because there's nothing there that can be excluded in the event of an argument, and the structural engineer saying, no, I wasn't supposed to do that. Doesn't say you weren't. So it is really important to look at the actual wording. And for example, there are words like ensure that the project meets building regs or meets planning conditions. Well, unless you are doing all the roles, including that contractor, you can't ensure anything of the sort. You can monitor that other people are doing their works so that you can do all your reasonable skill and care that your bit is. So those the individual words of the schedule of services is absolutely critical.
Are important, aren't they? Yes, and that ties into what I look at. So your side of the fence is writing the contracts and obviously commenting on other contracts that you see. From my point of view, my clients who I'm arranging professional indemnity cover show me contracts and I review them and pass comment on whether falls within the scope of the insurance cover or not. And one of the crucial things that we're looking for is to see whether contractually our clients are accepting liability beyond what would otherwise apply at law. And this is where, as you've alluded to there, we're entering into territory where we're going beyond statutory requirements into areas where actually that additional contractual liability isn't going to be insured. And it falls to this poor drafting of contracts.
It does.
And, I've been looking at contracts for a long time. And, I've seen what, at first glance, well, that looks good, but it's either a boilerplate type wording, a standard wording, which isn't really fit for purpose.
No.
And the people who are offering those to our clients are saying, look, this is our standard contract basis, take it or leave it, probably don't understand what the implications are of forcing those terms on our client, and whether they're insurable or not, whether or not there's liabilities that actually are quite onerous. And I think, this really brings into focus how important looking at the individual contract terms, rather than just accepting that fits for every single contract for that particular client.
Which it never will.
It never will.
There's, I mean, the one size fits all is really one size doesn't fit anybody.
No.
I mean, obviously we have developer clients for whom we have the standard set as the base document, but that's all it is. It's the base document that's drafted on the basis of how they like to run their business. But then each one has to be amended, changed, rethought, depending on what the project is, what the person's doing, whether it's the contractor or whoever. That it is only a starting point. And the reason we have base documents actually is fundamentally because drafting from scratch every time would be very expensive and we'd like to forget something. But there are there are issues I'm finding now, because obviously what drives the development market is funding. If the bank says no, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
And the funders are getting, I think, increasingly more demanding in terms of what they want, what is considered to be institutionally acceptable in construction contracts, and that doesn't always fit with what's
It's not always
risk.
compatible, is it?
No.
And that's the danger. So I've come across this many times where the funders have an unrealistic idea of what is contractually acceptable.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to push back.
It is. It was completely, because if the bank says no, then nothing happens.
No. And when we think about risk and, what is insurable and what isn't, then, that's a really big area. And particularly when we come across collateral warranties that the funders are requiring, which is their standard, and it is a take it or leave it situation, if that collateral warranty goes beyond the liability established under the original appointment, that in itself is a problem.
Yeah, well,
and it's just having, and I think for the people who are on the webinar today, having an awareness of the fact that contracts don't fit together very well, particularly.
They don't.
And it's like having a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces aren't quite put
Not
correctly.
quite right. No, exactly.
And they don't quite fit together. You've got a sense of what they should look like and what the big picture is, but the individual pieces just don't quite fit.
And it's always the joins. It's always the joins, and it's the joins, whether it's PI insurance between two consultants, or frankly, the insurance of the actual works and the buildings between, say, a landlord and a contractor. It's always at the joins where there's a problem.
Yeah.
And whether it's double insured or nobody insured, they're just as bad.
Yes,
because
definitely.
it's going to end up in a fight, which from the point of view of my professional colleagues is lovely, but from the point of view of my clients is not so much lovely. And it is that difficulty. And one of the reasons why we have sort of standard documents for clients is we have a bank of them, and they, you might think that we just go, oh, those belong to that client, those belong to that, but they are actually very carefully thought out so that for each individual client, the gaps are meshed. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a development where, say, the structural engineer is working on ACE terms and the architect is working on RABA terms and the contractor is working on an unamended JCT, you're going to have holes. And if something goes wrong, you're going to find out very expensively about those holes.
Exactly. You'll have a situation where everyone's pointing fingers at each other.
Absolutely.
And lots of different parties being brought in to try and defend something. And sometimes what we've found is that if you are the last man standing who has got insurance and the other professionals who are having the finger pointed at them haven't,
or haven't got very much,
then you're left holding the baby. And again, it's going back to one of the things we mentioned before about not accepting or being clear on what liability you are accepting, not accepting anything beyond what you want to be accepting. So it's that clarity, it's that documentation. Obviously the legal contracts and the scope of services are really important. But also I think, what I found with our clients is the more that they are communicating with their clients and all the other parties, the more the risk is reduced and mitigated. Now, not completely, because when things go horribly wrong or the contractor goes over budget, it's very hard to not have a claim in your direction. But the more communication that there is, the more understanding, and the more an awareness of where those gaps potentially lie, I think the better. And from my point of view, when we think about what's insurable, what isn't, and risk in general, it's as important to know where those gaps are as where those gaps don't exist and where the cover is expected to respond. And then there's a conversation to be had. And whether that's with the contractor, whether that's with the developer, whether that's with the funder, it's saying, look, do you realise there's this gap here? There is that uncertainty. And I think, the more you and I and others involved in this area have these sort of conversations, and we we're all on the same page, I think the better, because things in my experience are quite disjointed.
Yes, they are.
And there's no real benefit in things existing in the silos that they are.
No, exactly.
They have to work together.
Yeah. It is very difficult because clients are coming to come to my developers, sort of the user clients, as it were, as opposed to consultants and contractors, come into two categories. One is the developers who generally know what they're doing, and are very happy to take advice and take advice and say, sort it out, whatever. But then we've got this massive area of what you might call one-time only clients, whether it's a commercial tenant having some fitting out works done, or it fits, a couple of individuals having a massive expensive green oak frame house built or whatever. And those are very high risk for consultants and contractors, because there is no understanding of how the industry works, no understanding of how the contracts work, no understanding of the implied terms, and the normal practices. And those are the ones where you also get every consultant does put in their own terms and conditions, which is great for them, because that's got them there.
Great for them, but
it's
not
great,
not collectively. It's not great.
No, exactly. Because even if your terms and conditions allegedly clearly say that you're not responsible for X, Y, Z, that won't stop a disgruntled client from pointing the finger at everybody, and you'll be tied up in litigation. And even with cost recovery, you don't get 100% cost recovery, so you'll be tied up in litigation for however long, when you should be concentrating on your business.
Yeah.
So it's actually more useful for everybody, consultants and contractors, to check what's going on, what's happening with the other contracts. Are they genuinely meshed together properly? Because if they're not, that's just going to be asking for trouble later.
It definitely is. The I'm all right, Jack mentality just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
You're right. It doesn't shield you from that type of situation.
No, because it's not whether ultimately it's usually not whether you win or lose on the claim. It's actually the costs, because going to the TCC, the High Court for Technology and Construction, is heinously expensive. So and there's nothing anybody can do about that. That's just the way it is. But it is not sensible for everybody to go, well, I'm using this and I'm using that, because it doesn't work.
No, and the effects of that are amplified when we think about it in terms of the BSA and the additional liabilities there, and all of the uncertainty. So a lot of what we've talked about are good principles to adopt in general, but it's just being extra cautious when it comes to the BSA.
Absolutely.
And that higher risk
buildings
exactly. And we are entering into an era where insurers are going to see more and more claims, more and more requests for cover by people that are less experienced in this area.
And ultimately, the industry needs to remember, about solicitors as well, that the PI insurance is not some kind of government-funded service. The insurers, the underwriters, are in it as a business to make money, and if the market is too risky, they'll pull out. They don't have to do it. They've got other things they can do, and so there does need to be an understanding of not just assuming it will be all right forever, because it hasn't in the past. There have been times when the market's hardened out of all proportion in the past, and it could do it again. So ensuring that you're talking to your insurers will actually help not only you, but in my view, will actually help everybody.
Exactly.
And generally keep costs down and keep competition flowing nicely.
Couldn't agree with you more. We're coming to the end of the time slot. I think before we move on to, there's a question in the chat.
Oh, yes.
There. Before we move on to that, I think just to finish off, a few key takeaways for the audience, Darren.
I would say, from the BSA point of view, check your competencies, check that you can meet the SNEEB, the skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours as individuals, and that your people can do that. Check that your company has the organisational ability to meet the building regs requirement, and start putting together a portfolio of evidence to demonstrate it, because it's kind of it's all very well asserting, but you need to demonstrate.
Yeah.
And if you've got the portfolio ready once, then you can keep using it because the same thing will apply to all clients. And obviously check your contracts before you sign them.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. From my point of view, being able to demonstrate competency, what you've done, why you did it, that's really essential for the defence of any professional indemnity claim, but more so with BSA related because of the uncertainty. Beyond that, other tips that I would leave the audience with are communicating with your insurance advisor, with your insurers, making sure that in situations where it's a new area of work, that you've shared that information. Insurers are happy with that. Insurers aren't really very good giving advice on how to manage risk themselves. So it falls to the likes of ourselves as insurance brokers to be helping steer clients on things like that. But having an awareness of your own limitations from a competence point of view, where things tend to go wrong is where people have taken on work where they've seen the pound signs and thought this is going to be lucrative, but haven't really got the expertise, the experience, the understanding of where their liabilities begin and end, where things tend to go wrong and unravel. So it's been great talking to you, Darren. It's been a really interesting conversation. Yep. So let's start with the first question. Got a question from Josh. My understanding is that the idea with matching the names with each other is that they eventually become conducted by the same person/party.
Well, that's a very nice idea, but unfortunately, it will work with the principal contractor role. That is probably the easiest. The principal designer roles are two completely different roles. One is to do with pre-construction safety, and one is to do with the design of the building. And you don't need to be a designer to do pre-construction safety, and you don't need to be construction safety and do it. So it is. I can understand why that might be a nice idea, and if the person has the relevant competencies and is able to do them, then there's no reason why they can't. But I can't see it ever becoming the default position because they are completely different roles.
And Dan Bailey, morning Dan, thanks for your question. As a consultant, how is it best to check that all the contractual documents mesh? This sounds like a difficult thing to achieve and understand. It does sound very difficult.
It does sound difficult, but on the assumption that your client, you're talking nicely to your client at the beginning, and on the hope that they've appointed some solicitors, then just ask, just say, are all consultants being appointed on the same terms? And we'll say, yeah, or no, whether they are or not. And if we say yeah, then that makes, there's no reason for us not to disclose that. So yeah, if you want to know, just ask the question.
Yeah. And from where the responsibilities begin and end, again, there's a challenge there. But it comes back to the clarity and how the contracts have been drafted.
Yeah, and that really is the responsibility of the solicitors and the project manager or the client, if they haven't got a project manager, to look at that set of the engineers and consultants and say, does that cover everything we need, or have we got any gaps? There's an element of this is what I'm going to do, and that's perfect because that's what you're intending to do for the money, but it's not your responsibility to check that there are gaps between services. But you do. It would be worth checking that the terms are all the same, and you can do that.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Darren.
Must be responsible for something.
Yeah. So look, it's an ongoing challenge, isn't it? All of this, really. So that whilst we've given some good advice and helped steer people in these areas, the starting point is understanding that there is risk there.
Absolutely.
And then understanding what your own tolerance for that risk is and how you mitigate that. And obviously, from our perspective as insurance professionals, we're there to guide our clients and assist further. So if anyone wants to get in touch, and likewise, Chris, thank you you've got your question there. Good to see you on here. If as an architect you pick up the delivery role on behalf of a contractor, post-design stage on a project, do you take on the responsibility of design decisions made by the design architect, or does your responsibility only begin at the start of your appointment, i.e. stage 4 or 5?
Well, it depends entirely on what the contracts say, fundamentally. This happens quite a lot if it's a design and build contract and you're not novating the consultants. And it will depend on the terms of the architect's appointment, both from the if you're not novated, from the contractor. Now, the contractor, if it's say an amended JCT or it's an engineering contract, the contractor will be picking up that that design liability as part of their design and build role for what's in the ERs or the spec or what's been done before. Whether or not the contractor chooses to pass on that requirement to the contractor is between you and the contractor. If I were the architect, I would be very firmly saying no, because in order to be happy that you're putting your PI on the line for something somebody else has done, you're basically going to have to check it all again from scratch. And unless you quoted to do that in your fee proposal, then that's going to be a lot of work for, frankly, a lot of benefit. So you don't have to, no, is the answer to that. You can if you want to, and if you're getting paid for it and you're happy that your insurers are happy with it, but there is no reason why you should.
Great, thanks, Darren. Have we any other questions there? I think that's everything.
I have actually thought of something we didn't cover, if I may backtrack
yes, please
slightly
do.
in
Yeah.
terms of the responsibilities. And it's the responsibility of both the principal designer and the principal contractor under the building regs. Is the first thing they have to do. Of course, the first thing the legislation says is that they have to, do they say ensure or do they just say appropriate steps? I can't remember off the top of my head. They have to check basically that the client understands the client's duties. And to be honest, that could be the biggest problem of the lot. Because if you've got a client who doesn't do this, they're not a developer, they don't do this normally, then you're going to have to explain what the new building regs duty holders are as from scratch.
Yes,
So
yeah.
good luck with that. You might want to send one a training course, frankly.
Quite a responsibility, isn't it? Yes,
it is,
yeah.
yes.
So I think all of this reinforces the fact that people need to be well insured.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, we've got a couple more questions. Chris Commons, thank you, Chris, for your question. Do you think the industry understands or misunderstands the difference between a designer
Yes.
and principal designer, and the fact that PD is not responsible for the actual design, but the coordination of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, next. Misunderstands is where we are on that one.
Yeah, and I think it's a long list of things that are misunderstood.
It is.
From my perspective, there are still people that I interact with that don't fully appreciate what a collateral warranty is.
No, absolutely.
So yes, yeah.
This is a whole another level.
Yeah. And to be fair, anybody outside of the industry, if they came across the term principal designer, there would be no reason for them to naturally assume that it wasn't to do with anything other than
the building regs or the CDM had anything to do with it, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, I used to like the old term CDM coordinator. That made sense.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, the principal designer for building regs does have to be in a position to kind of direct that the design is changed if it's not going to meet the building regs. But yeah, they don't have to be doing the design themselves, but they do have to understand the design. Which is critical.
Exactly. Another question: are insurers happy for the standard PI to be covered for 15 years rather than 12 years after these BSA changes, as we have pushed back often? Yeah, insurers are happy with that. Yeah, there's no issue. They accept the fact that liability exists now, so there should be no pushback on that. I think, as we talked about during the conversation, where it is more of a concern is if in the terms of your contract you've accepted liability beyond what would be normally expected and beyond those statutory requirements, but yeah, there's no issue otherwise.
One of the things I have found recently with a couple of consultants is it comes back to them not knowing what the Act has done to the regs. Is that they were both they said to me completely sort of in passing, that they are intending to retire, and they were only going to get run-off insurance for 6 years. And I kind of went, what about what about the other 9?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to make run-off insurance more expensive.
Yes, yeah. I mean that's. I mean, we've got lots of things that we can pick up on future webinars. So we plan on running other webinars, but that is a really good point, and I've got my own views on that and how people think about run-off cover. So we'll park that, and perhaps pick that up again. That's a longer conversation to be having. Got another question that's come in. Noticed a lot of developers and timber frames takes on principal designer, principal contractor roles. Is this typical practice?
It's certainly not abnormal. It depends. It depends whether or not the contractor, if the contractor has design obligations under the contract, then sorry, I got sidetracked by another question. Then there's no reason why they can't do both. It depends on how the project is set up and what they're doing and who's got design liability. But yeah, it's not abnormal at all.
Great, thank you. Osman, thank you for your question. Just to clarify, does the 15-year limitation period apply to dwellings, not offices or commercial buildings?
No, it's not that simple. No, it's basically there are the way that the Act amended the limitation period was by amending existing legislation. So it didn't. It is a delight to read. If you've ever read it, it's all lines that say in section 2.3 replace A with B, and it's a delight to read. But yes, it basically it's not just dwellings. Is the short answer.
Great, thank you. Oh, more questions coming in. From Sarah, thank you for your question. Is it reasonable for insurers to no longer provide cover for buildings completed several years ago / preceding a given date? I wouldn't say that was reasonable.
I mean, the thing is, though, it's year of claim for PI insurance, not year of event, as it were. So
there would need to be a good reason for an insurer not to be providing cover for past work. So if there was something extraordinary about it, or if it hadn't previously been disclosed and they felt that it was out of kilter with the type of work that you'd previously carried out. So there would have to be a very good reason for it. We're not seeing insurers limiting that cover.
But I mean, actually, I would ask Sarah, are you talking about insuring the building or insuring the consultant or contractor? Because the question looks like it's providing cover for buildings, and in which case you're looking at buildings insurance.
Yes, and that's a different.
That's a whole different ballgame as to who insures and who won't insure and which bits they will and won't insure. So it's, I would say, whether or not it's reasonable, I think it's perfectly. I think it's something that's beginning to happen. You know.
Yeah. You're right. So Sarah, it's just a question whether it's in respect of the professional services or whether it's So I would say I've not come across insurers deliberately excluding cover for historic work beyond how the cover is normally set up for PI.
Yeah. Sarah, have you come across that? Well, Sarah's answering, go to on the next one. If the responsibility of design compliance with the design in the event of non-compliance with legal claims, what liabilities does the PD carry in relation to non-compliance? The PD is liable for making sure that the design, if it is constructed if the building is constructed according to that design, meets all relevant requirements. So it's the responsibility for any designer, and the roles under the regs are not merely a principal designer, principal contractor, and the client. There are also all designers and all contractors. So all designers have the responsibility for making sure that the work they do meets the all relevant requirements, which is a lovely way of including everything you can possibly think of. Nice bit of drafting there. But the PD is responsible for coordinating and ensuring that everybody else's does not just there. So they're both liable, but they're liable for different things. So an individual designer or firm is liable for the bit they're doing, but the PD is liable for making sure that all of it does.
Great, thank you, Darren. If there's no more, oh, here we go. Right, yes. Any further questions, we can
just email them.
respond to those offline. Like I say, the intention is to have further webinars, and we can pick up on some of the points we mentioned today and expand on those. Or if there are any areas that you'd like us to address in future webinars, very happy to do that. Needless to say, if any of you have any specific requirements legally or from an insurance perspective, Darren and I are very happy to field those inquiries. And I can certainly say, having reviewed the Roythornes standard contract terms for construction industry professionals, they meet all of the requirements that I have when I'm reviewing contracts. So they are insurance compliant, I'm pleased to say. So yeah,
embarrassing not to.
Whenever a client sends me a Roythornes contract, I can breathe a huge sigh of relief that I don't need to worry that it's going to be onerous or outside the scope of professional indemnity cover. So we'll bring it to an end. It's been great speaking to you, Darren. Thank you for that.
Thank you for that.
And thank you for everyone for joining, and hope to see you at future webinars. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.